The film opens with a university professor named Nitesh delivering a lecture to a group of medical school students. He explains that for a person to maintain their mental faculties, it is essential to sleep for 8 hours a day. However, in cases of insomnia, a person can remain awake for days without sleep. Such insomnia is often caused by psychological trauma or stress, which leads to an overactive mind that cannot rest. The professor continues, explaining that after 2 days of sleep deprivation, a person's mental abilities are impaired, and their ability to concentrate diminishes. If sleep deprivation continues for 3 days or more, auditory and visual hallucinations can occur. During the lecture, the professor addresses a student named Jane, who is sitting in the front row. Jane, a top student at the medical school, shares that she can stay awake for long stretches without sleep and often studies all night. She reveals that the longest she has gone without sleep is 3 days. Jane then opens up about a traumatic event from her past. 3 years ago, a group of thieves broke into her family's home, killing her father and mother. Since then, she has lived with her grandmother and sister June, due to the trauma. This event has caused Jane to develop a psychological condition, and she now checks the locks on her doors every night to ensure the safety of her family. One day, Jane wakes up to find that her grandmother's house is at risk of being seized by the bank. The bank is threatening to take it within 3 months unless the loan of 750,000 baht is paid. Jane is financially strained and struggles to figure out how to come up with the money. Desperate, she confides in Professor Nitesh. She tells him that she plans to drop out of medical school to work and pay off the loan, despite having only 2 years left before graduation. The professor advises against this decision, reminding Jane that she is the best student in the class, and leaving school would ruin her future. However, Jane insists that she has no other choice. Nitesh then interrupts her, handing her a business card from a German pharmaceutical company that is seeking volunteers for an experiment called The Deep. The company promises a large sum of money in exchange for participation. He urges her to join the experiment to earn the money needed to pay off her loan. Jane agrees, and she goes to the company. At the company, Jane is shown a video explaining the details of the DEEP experiment. The experiment aims to extract a curative substance from the human brain that is secreted when a person stays awake for extended periods. When a person stays awake for 2 days or more, the substance, known as ketone, increases in the brain, boosting concentration. After the video, Jane meets Dr. Miller, the company manager, who explains that the experiment consists of 3 levels. For the first level, Jane will be paid 100,000 baht if she stays awake for an entire day without sleeping. During this time, the company will extract the ketone from her brain to develop a treatment formula. Jane agrees to participate and undergoes the procedure, during which Dr. Miller implants an advanced chip in her neck to extract the ketone. He gives her a watch that monitors her heart rate and calculates the ketone levels in her brain. Jane is told that if she stays awake for 24 hours, her ketone levels will reach 100%, at which point she will return to the company to have the ketone extracted and receive her payment. Dr. Miller also warns Jane that if she sleeps for more than a minute, the chip will malfunction and could cause her heart to stop. At first, Jane is hesitant and fears for her safety, but Dr. Miller reassures her by explaining that the watch will sound an alarm if she begins to fall asleep. He advises her not to share any details about the experiment with anyone. Jane agrees, and after leaving the company, she stays up late studying and checks the watch. She sees that her ketone levels have reached 41%. When Jane returns home, she reassures her grandmother that she has found a job that will allow her to pay off the loan. However, she becomes concerned when her younger sister June comes home late and refuses to explain where she has been. June insists she is training with her band and asks Jane not to interfere in her life. The next day at university, Jane sits down for breakfast when her colleague Wayne approaches her. Wayne, a reckless young man who often spends his nights at bars drinking and using drugs, notices the watch on Jane's wrist and realizes she is part of the experiment. Jane, who is wary of revealing too much, does not share any details but learns from Wayne that Dr. Nitesh had given him the company's card after he mentioned staying up for 3 days without sleep. Wayne introduces Jane to another participant, Scene, who also wears the company's watch, and soon they are joined by a young man named Beach. Beach is a quiet, introverted gamer who spends all his time playing video games and has no friends. The group becomes close and they exchange phone numbers. Together, they monitor their ketone levels, which are at 80%. This means that they are only 20% away from completing the first level of the experiment. After 6 hours, their ketone levels reach 100%, and they return to the company to have the ketone extracted. Dr. Miller keeps his promise and gives each of them 100,000 baht. The group spends their money, with Jane using hers to pay off part of the loan for her grandmother's house. She also buys a new phone for her sister June. The following day, Jane and her friends, Sin, Beach, and Wayne, gather and head to the gym to play bowling. While there, Sin confesses that since joining the Deep experiment, she feels as though someone is constantly watching her. She's afraid that someone might know about the experiment and is plotting to kill them in order to steal their earnings. Wayne brushes off her concerns, telling her that it's just her imagination and nothing more. Jane then asks her friends what they would do if Dr. Miller offered them the chance to participate in the second level of the experiment. The group eagerly agrees, stating that they'd have no hesitation in participating, as they're all accustomed to staying up late and could easily go days without sleep. Jane, however, warns them that the experiment isn't as easy as they think. The longer they stay awake, the more their bodies are at risk of serious health problems. After their conversation, they decide to leave, as it's getting late. As Beach walks with Sin, he confesses that he's been watching her live videos on Instagram, and it's clear from his words that he has a crush on her. Sin brushes him off, and she heads off to catch a taxi. When Jane returns home, she gives her sister June the new mobile phone she bought for her and urges her to focus on her studies, assuring her that she will soon be able to pay off the loan. Just then, Wayne's father arrives and starts questioning Jane, asking why Wayne has been acting out and where he's been. Meanwhile, Sin reaches her apartment and has a conversation with her mother over the phone. She tells her mother that she's tired of studying medicine and wants to switch to communication studies. Her mother becomes angry, scolding her for her poor grades and advising her to focus on her studies and avoid social media so she can graduate and become a doctor. The next day, Jane and her friends head to the pharmaceutical company after receiving a call from Dr. Miller, who invites them to participate in the second level of the experiment. This level requires them to stay awake for a period of 5 days, though it could stretch longer depending on their individual brain chemistry. Jane asks Dr. Miller how much they will be paid if they complete this level, and he tells her they will each receive 500,000 baht. The temptation of the money convinces them, and they agree to join. The experiment begins, and after 3 days, they are all severely exhausted and struggling to stay awake. The problem, however, is that their ketone levels are dangerously low. Wayne's ketone level, for example, is still below 40%. One day, while attending a basketball practice, Wayne becomes so disoriented that he fails to notice the ball coming toward him and is knocked unconscious when it hits his head. His friends rush to help him, but one of them, out of frustration, calls him a failure, blaming him for his mother's death. Wayne, who is in a state of severe mental exhaustion and hallucination due to the lack of sleep, doesn't react to the insult. Later that night, Jane is at home studying but is too tired to focus. Her sister June is playing the guitar, and Jane becomes frustrated, telling her to stop so she can concentrate. June interrupts and confronts Jane, asking her what kind of job has allowed her to earn 100,000 baht in a day and pay off part of the loan. Jane ignores her and leaves. As she walks out, she spots June's company card on her desk, sensing that her sister may be involved in something similar. The next day, as Jane walks through the university, she notices several other students wearing the company's watch, indicating that they are still participating in the first level of the experiment. Jane realizes that she and her friends are the only ones in the second level, as they are visibly exhausted and appear almost zombified from the lack of sleep. She also notices that Wayne's ketone level is the highest among them at 52%, likely because he plays basketball regularly, which increases his physical activity. Jane tests the theory that movement boosts ketone production and decides to get the group to do more physical activity to increase their ketone levels. They go to Beach's house and use his spa, hoping that the physical movement will help raise their ketone levels. After some time, Wayne talks to Jane about her past, and she opens up about how a gang killed her parents 3 years ago, and since then, she's been working hard to support her sister. Wayne, in an attempt to help them stay awake longer, reveals that he has a secret plan. He's been stealing stimulants from the pharmacy college lab and making drinks for his friends, which will help them stay awake for longer periods without sleep. Jane warns him that these stimulants are dangerous and could cause severe mental damage or even death. Before she can stop him, Wayne drinks one of the stimulant-laced drinks himself and convinces the others to drink as well, arguing that their only option is to stay awake or die due to the chip implanted in their necks. Reluctantly, Jane and the others drink the stimulants and continue to dance to stay active, trying to increase their ketone levels. Later, Sin comes out of the bathroom and hears strange noises coming from Beach's room. She enters and discovers a disturbing collection of photos and videos of her. Sin realizes that Beach has been secretly obsessed with her and has been watching her. Horrified, she faints and collapses to the ground. Jane and Wayne rush to her aid, fearing that the chip in her neck will malfunction if she loses consciousness, potentially leading to her death. They manage to wake Sin up just in time, and Bella realizes that their cure tone percentage has hit 100% at the company. Now, they are eligible to take the money from Dr. Miller. However, they decide they won't participate in the experiment any further. Despite this, Dr. Miller tempts them with $1 million for joining the third level, but they still refuse and leave, heading home to sleep after 5 exhausting days. Upon waking up, they return to university. Beach approaches Sin, apologizing for his actions and confessing that he admires and loves her. Sin smiles but walks away, unaffected. At the same time, Jane is called into Dr. Nitesh's office due to her sudden drop in grades, even though she had been the top student in her batch. She explains that she had been too focused on the company's experiment and hadn't had time to study, promising to improve her grades and focus more on her academics now that she's done with the experiment. Later, Wayne confesses his feelings for Jane, but she cuts him off, saying she considers him just a friend and doesn't have time for a relationship. Her focus is entirely on her studies and business. Wayne, heartbroken, goes to a bar to drown his sorrows. The next day, Jane notices an ambulance at the university transporting a deceased student. She reflects on the dangers of the experiment, realizing that the student had died because they had fallen asleep before completing the second level. When Jane returns home, she finds her grandmother is ill and needs to be hospitalized. With no money left after paying off the loan, June arrives, handing Jane an envelope containing 500,000 baht. She knows Jane participated in the experiment and passed both levels, but she's angry with her for not consulting her first. Jane, overwhelmed, explains that she did it to pay off the loan, but June, frustrated, storms out, accusing Jane of being selfish. The next day, Jane goes to the company to confront Dr. Miller, pleading with him to not allow June to participate in the third level. To her surprise, June is already there, and Dr. Miller is aware that she signed up for the third level. Jane threatens to report him to the police unless he removes the chip from her sister's neck. Dr. Miller reveals that June signed a contract and there's nothing the police can do. He offers to remove the chip, but only if Jane brings her friends and convinces them to participate in the third level. Exhausted and desperate, Jane agrees to bring her friends despite their reluctance. Wayne agrees to help, but Sin and Beach refuse, scared of the extreme challenge ahead. The next day, Jane, her sister, and Wayne head to the company, where they find Beach waiting for them, ready to participate. Sin eventually shows up, having changed her mind, and agrees to join as well. They all go to Dr. Miller's office, where they are informed that the third level requires them to stay awake for 10 days. Reluctantly, they agree to proceed. Dr. Nitesh is brought in to help, administering strong stimulants to keep them awake. She advises them to stay in the hospital, as going home could cause one of them to fall asleep and die. The group agrees and stays in the hospital under her care. As the days pass, they keep taking the stimulants and trying to stay awake. On the 6th day, Beach is playing video games when he hears gunfire outside, causing the group to hallucinate. Wayne sees his deceased mother, Sin imagines her face disfigured, and Jane envisions herself dying. Jane wakes up to find her friends in a similar state of exhaustion and realizes that they can't go on like this much longer. She decides to leave the hospital, but Wayne insists they stay together. A heated argument ensues, with Jane accusing Sin of only joining the experiment to help Wayne and not out of genuine concern. Wayne, furious, accuses her of being selfish, while Beach tries to mediate, but it only escalates into a fight. In the midst of the chaos, Jane goes to Dr. Nitesh's office and accidentally discovers a room filled with surveillance monitors. There she finds a file marked, "Actor wanted to play the role of doctor," and realizes that Dr. Miller is not actually a doctor. She pieces together that Dr. Nitesh has been manipulating them all along, orchestrating the entire experiment as part of a larger, sinister plan. Jane now understands that Dr. Nitesh is behind everything and that Miller was just a pawn in her scheme. Dr. Nitesh's real motives are exposed when Jane discovers a hidden room filled with surveillance monitors and documents revealing her sinister plans. Suddenly, Nitesh confronts her, demanding to know why she is there. Jane escapes, running back to her friends and urgently explaining everything. She insists they call the police, but they quickly realize the mobile network has been disconnected. Nitesh's voice echoes through the speakers, revealing that she is behind the network blackout. She coldly informs them that they are trapped in the building until she extracts the curatonin from their brains, even if it kills them. Wayne rushes to the door, only to find it locked. They try to break it down, but fail. Exhausted and desperate, they struggle to figure out their next move. On the 7th day, Sin, furious, stands before the surveillance cameras, cursing Nitesh and vowing revenge. In a fit of rage, she smashes all the cameras. Meanwhile, Wayne collapses. Jane frantically tries to revive him, but he appears to have died after succumbing to a brief moment of sleep. Nitesh, monitoring his vitals through his wristband, confirms his death and comes to retrieve his body. In the surveillance room, Nitesh removes the chip from Wayne's neck to harvest the curatonin. But as she prepares to leave, Wayne suddenly wakes up and strikes her, knocking her unconscious. It turns out Wayne hadn't actually died. Jane had secretly injected him with a drug that temporarily stopped his heart to trick Nitesh. When Nitesh regains consciousness, she finds herself surrounded by the group, who demand to know why she betrayed them despite their trust. Nitesh breaks down, pulling back a curtain to reveal her comatose lover, lying in a hospital bed. She tearfully explains that he had been researching the effects of sleep deprivation when he stayed awake for 15 consecutive days. The resulting hallucinations caused him to jump from a building. Although he survived the fall, he slipped into a coma and had remained in that state for 20 years. In her desperate search for a cure, she discovered that his body responded to the rare substance curatonin, which is produced in the brains of those who stay awake for prolonged periods. To save him, she founded the company, charging students to participate in experiments to extract the substance. However, her lover required a much higher concentration of curatonin, which led her to push Jane and her friends into the dangerous third level of the experiment. Jane calls Nitesh's actions selfish and cruel, accusing her of endangering lives for her personal gain. Nitesh tearfully insists she never wanted to hurt anyone, but was driven by love and desperation. Suddenly, she attacks Jane, injecting her with a drug in an attempt to escape. Sin and Beach manage to subdue Nitesh, but Jane collapses, slipping into unconsciousness. As her condition worsens, Wayne uses a defibrillator to revive her. While Wayne fights to save Jane, Nitesh attacks Sin and Beach, trying to inject Beach with an anesthetic. However, Sin strikes Nitesh on the head, knocking her out. In the chaos, Jane regains consciousness. and the group finally overpowers Nitesh. The police arrive and arrest her, removing the chips implanted in Jane and her friends. In the aftermath, the group returns to their normal lives. Wayne reconciles with his family and helps them with their food business. Sin quits medical school to pursue her dream of becoming a social media influencer, celebrating her new path with her followers. Jane and her sister June bond while working together to support their family. The friends later reunite at Beach's place, reminiscing about their journey and vowing to remain close forever.